The night never asked you to be strong. It simply arrived, without a checklist or condition, folding over the edges of your thoughts like a soft blanket, quiet and unjudging. Yet still, even here in the silence, your mind whispered louder than anything outside. There were no arguments echoing in the room, no footsteps down the hall, no phones lighting up with new demands. But in your chest, the weight of everything left unsaid pressed down like a memory you couldn't name. You weren't fighting anyone anymore, but you were still defending yourself in the dark. And maybe no one ever told you this, not when you needed it the most, but you deserved quiet too. Even then, even when you thought you didn't, you go back sometimes. Not on purpose, but the mind doesn't always ask for permission before pulling you into old rooms. You see the way you sat at the edge of the bed, trying to word everything right, afraid of being misunderstood. You remember the way you typed, deleted, rewrote, and still never felt like it came out right. You remember the long pauses in conversations, not because there was nothing to say, but because your mind was scanning for the safest possible words. You were trying to protect everyone else from your thoughts, even though they came from the softest part of you. And no one saw how exhausting that was. Not fully. Sometimes it wasn't what was said, but what wasn't. The silence you filled with assumptions. The late nights where one small message felt like a 1,000-pound question. The way a single unread reply unraveled your peace for hours. You didn't want to be this sensitive, did you? But your care was never the problem. The world just taught you to carry it like it was. And maybe you thought overthinking made you strong. Like if you just planned harder or saw every angle, you could protect yourself from hurt. But no one tells you how much that planning costs. How heavy it becomes. How it steals the softness from even the quietest hours. You weren't trying to be difficult. You were trying to be safe. You were trying to be understood. You were trying to fix everything before it ever broke. But you were never meant to be a machine that predicted damage. You were meant to be held, to be listened to be allowed. Silence that didn't feel dangerous. There were nights you stayed awake long after the world slept. Not because you weren't tired, but because your mind couldn't find the door to rest. Your thoughts spun with the speed of someone who had learned that rest was only earned through fixing everything first. But the truth is, you didn't need to be better to deserve peace. You didn't need to have the perfect words or the perfect timing. The version of you that was tangled in uncertainty still deserved a place to lay down gently. Still deserved a night where nothing had to be solved. No one heard the arguments you had with yourself. The way you dissected your own tone. The way you replayed their reaction like a film loop, searching for flaws in your script. You treated every interaction like it could be a test, every silence like it must be your fault. But none of that was your mind's natural state. That was survival. That was learned. That was a heart that had spent too much time absorbing noise. That wasn't its own. Tonight doesn't ask for any of that. It does not want your answers. It does not need your apology. Tonight is here just to remind you that your breathing is enough. That your body is still here, still trying. That your thoughts, no matter how loud they've been, are not dangerous. They're just tired. Like you. And they deserve rest too. You might think that peace will come once you figure out the perfect sentence, the perfect closure, the perfect version of who you were supposed to be. But what if peace is already here? What if it's hiding in this moment? In the inhale you're taking right now, in the soft way your chest rises even though your thoughts are still busy. What if the quiet you've been craving isn't the absence of thought, but the safety to have those thoughts without judgment? You weren't too much. You weren't broken. You were just never told that your mind could be a gentle place. That your sensitivity wasn't a flaw to fix, but a voice to listen to. And now, here, in this still moment where no one is asking anything of you, you can begin again. You don't have to earn quiet. You don't have to prove anything to be worthy of soft rest. You are not here to be efficient. You are here to feel, to heal, to slowly remember what it's like to think without fear. And if you're still carrying a voice inside that says you don't deserve rest until you've earned it, I want you to know that voice is not the truth. That voice is not your own. You were always allowed to stop, always allowed to breathe, even then, even when you thought you were failing, even when you thought you were the problem. You were still worthy of being comforted, still worthy of a mind that didn't tremble under pressure. The world told you that quiet had to be earned, but I hope tonight proves otherwise. I hope the stillness wraps around your thoughts like a hand that never left. I hope you feel the way. The darkness doesn't ask anything of you. It just holds space. It just listens. It just lets you be. If your thoughts are still trying to protect you, that's okay. Let them. But also remind them that not everything needs to be fixed tonight. Let them know it's safe now. The storm they're bracing for isn't here. They don't need to keep the engine running. They can slow down. They can soften, and so can you. If this moment brought you even one breath of peace, feel free to let a small light below. You never needed to be perfect to deserve quiet. You only needed someone to remind you. You are being reminded now. There was a night when the clock had long passed midnight, and yet your eyes still chased the ceiling, your breath shallow and slow. The world outside had gone quiet, but your mind kept speaking in circles. Not loudly, not violently, just persistently, like a soft tapping that never stopped. You told yourself that if you just thought a little deeper, maybe peace would come. Maybe if you just replayed the moment one more time, you'd understand what went wrong. Maybe if you analyzed every word they said, you could prevent this feeling from returning. You were not trying to hurt yourself. You were trying to solve something. You were trying to earn your rest. You weren't sitting in that darkness to punish yourself. You thought you were helping yourself understand, helping yourself find the piece that didn't fit. But sometimes the puzzle doesn't make sense, not because you missed something, but because you were never meant to put it together. Alone, that night, you weren't broken. You were just overwhelmed, and that's not the same thing. But no one explained the difference to you, did they? You thought overthinking was a kind of preparation. If you could just prepare hard enough, you wouldn't be caught off guard. If you could just think ahead far enough, you could stop the worst from happening. But peace doesn't live in the future. It never has. It waits in the stillness, the place just beyond all the noise. And on that night, you were so busy searching for safety in your thoughts, you didn't realize safety was trying to find you in the silence. There's a heaviness that comes with trying to manage what can't be controlled, like carrying an invisible weight you didn't ask for, like checking the lock over and over, not because it's open, but because you're afraid it might be. That night, you weren't just thinking, you were protecting yourself the only way. You knew how, and even if no one saw the effort it took to keep yourself composed, it mattered. The quiet fight you carried mattered. Maybe you thought if you could explain things better in your head, they'd feel lighter. Maybe you believed that if you could just understand what you did wrong, you'd finally let yourself sleep. But the truth is, sometimes there is no better version of the conversation. Sometimes the silence wasn't your fault. Sometimes the way someone looked at you wasn't a reflection of your worth. And no amount of midnight analyzing could undo the simple truth that not everything broken can be fixed in your mind. There was a moment, and you'll remember it if you look softly enough, where your body tried to sleep even as your brain kept racing. Your limbs grew heavy, your eyes fluttered closed for a second, then opened again with another wave of thought. You were drifting, then grabbing the wheel again, like someone who couldn't trust the car to drive itself. But you were not failing. You were just scared of letting go. You didn't know that peace isn't something to be chased. It's something to be allowed. You've lived with this quiet war inside your mind for longer than anyone realizes. You've spent years learning how to predict pain before it happens. But the cost of that gift is that it never lets you be fully here, fully now. And sometimes the fear isn't even about what might go wrong. It's about the silence that follows when there's nothing left to fix. That silence felt unfamiliar, didn't it? Like something waiting in the dark. But it wasn't waiting to hurt you. It was waiting to hold you. Waiting to remind you that you don't have to keep proving you care. Your overthinking was never a weakness. It was the echo of a heart that felt too deeply, too early, too often. You cared so much, you learned to imagine every possibility. But that night, your thoughts weren't solving anything. They were spinning, they were trying, and they were tired. And if you could go back to that moment now, back to the quiet room where your mind wouldn't stop, I'd ask you to try something different. Not to think harder, not to make sense of it all, but just to listen. Not to the thoughts, but to the space between them, that soft pause, that breath that came even without permission, that moment when the world was still and you were still here, still enough, still worthy. Peace doesn't arrive like an answer. It arrives like a gentle friend. It doesn't fix, it doesn't solve, it simply stays. And on that night, it was staying beside you, even when you couldn't feel it, even when your thoughts were louder than your heartbeat. It was still there, waiting patiently. Tonight, maybe your mind is still doing the same thing, trying to find the right pattern of thoughts that will unlock comfort. But maybe you don't have to solve your way into rest. Maybe you can soften your grip instead. Maybe the questions can remain open. Maybe your body knows the way, even if your thoughts do not. And if this night feels familiar, if you recognize that ache of wanting peace so badly, you're willing to overthink your way into it, just pause. Not to think harder, but to breathe softer, to let your body remind you of something your mind forgot. You are not in danger. You are not being judged. You are not being measured by how well you untangle what already happened. You are being asked to rest. And if tonight offers you even one soft breath that doesn't ask for answers, I hope you take it. I hope you know that the moment you stop trying to earn peace is the moment peace begins to find you. You were never broken. You were just tired of thinking your way through everything. You deserve to feel quiet without having to work for it. You always did. There comes a point when caring stops feeling like love and starts to feel like labor. It does not happen all at once. It creeps in slowly, disguised as loyalty, disguised as trying harder, disguised as doing what you believe is right. At first it feels like something you chose, something you're proud of. You care deeply, thoroughly, in a way that reaches places others never even notice. But eventually, you begin to notice how tired you are. Not the kind of tired that sleep cures, the kind of tired that settles behind your eyes, deep in your chest. A constant weight that no one else seems to feel. You kept showing up even when your energy was flickering. You kept replying with softness, even when you were unraveling. Inside, you gave second chances without keeping track. You excused things because you understood why they did it, even if it still hurt. You held space for other people's storms while yours raged quietly behind your ribs. And for a while, you convinced yourself this was love, this was strength, this was being the good one. But slowly, quietly, something inside you began to fray. There were moments when your hands shook as you typed, still choosing the kindest words you could. There were moments when your smile felt like a costume, when the effort it took to be composed could have moved mountains. But no one knew, because you didn't let them, because somewhere along the way you learned that your role was to hold it together, not to ask for help. You thought being the one who cared most meant you were winning, but caring shouldn't be a contest. It shouldn't be a performance. It shouldn't leave you empty. You started to notice the imbalance, the silence on the other end of conversations, the way your energy filled all the gaps while theirs stayed comfortably quiet, the way you always reached out first, fixed first, forgave first. You noticed how your needs went missing in the effort to meet everyone else's, and still you stayed, not because you liked it, but because caring was a habit, a rhythm your heart had memorized so deeply you forgot there was another way to love. Caring became a reflex. You were the one who remembered birthdays no one remembered yours, the one who checked in on people who disappeared when you were drowning, the one who said it's okay even when it wasn't, and when the exhaustion crept in, you blamed yourself. You thought maybe you were just sensitive, maybe you needed too much, maybe love was supposed to feel like this, like effort, like sacrifice, like never being enough, but still showing up anyway. There was a night, maybe more than one, when your heart felt bruised for no clear reason, when everything you were holding in started pressing back against your chest. You didn't cry because something new happened. You cried because everything finally caught up. You reached your limit. Quietly, without fanfare. Just a slow awareness that you could not keep giving from a place that never received. That you were forgetting how to rest inside your own love. And the hardest part, you still loved them. You still cared, even when it hurt. Even when they didn't notice what it was costing you. Even when they didn't ask how you were doing. That's what made it exhausting. Not the love itself, but the way it had nowhere safe to land. The way it echoed instead of being held. The way it kept giving with no reflection back. You started to disappear in the act of being good, being caring, being kind. You shrank so others could stay big. You quieted your needs so theirs could speak louder. You wore your patience like armor. You waited for them to notice the tired in your eyes, but they never did. And when they didn't, you told yourself maybe this is just how it is. Maybe you're just built this way, but you are not built to burn out. You are not here to carry love like a weight. You are not meant to be exhausted by something that is supposed to feel like home. You are allowed to be cared for, too. You are allowed to ask for softness in return. You are allowed to feel full, not just needed. There is no weakness in reaching your limit, no failure in wanting rest, no shame in admitting that caring has taken too much from you lately. Your heart is not less worthy because it needs a break. It is not less strong because it has grown tired. It is simply human, and human hearts deserve restoration. They deserve balance. They deserve to receive an equal measure to what they give. Tonight, if you feel that heaviness in your chest again, let it be heard. Let it speak, not to judge you, but to show you where you've been giving too much of yourself away. Let it remind you that even beautiful hearts must rest, that you can be soft and still have boundaries, that you can love deeply without losing yourself in the process. You are not selfish for wanting to be met where you stand. You are not asking too much when you ask for someone to hold space for your tired soul. You are not weak for needing what you so freely offer to others. And if this night brings even a flicker of truth back into your bones, the truth that love should not drain you, I hope you let it stay. I hope you wrap it around your aching mind like a gentle reminder that caring should never cost you your calm, that love should not leave you breathless. You are not a well to be emptied. You are a soul to be cherished. You deserve to be refilled. 2. There was never a switch you could flip to silence your thoughts. No lever to pull when the emotions began to swirl. You weren't restless by accident. You weren't scattered because you lacked focus. You were overwhelmed because you cared too deeply, and that care never knew how to sleep. It followed you into quiet rooms. It sat beside you during slow conversations. It clung to your chest when you were finally alone. Caring made your mind a constant storm, and not because you wanted to suffer, but because every small thing mattered to you more than anyone realized. You noticed what others missed. You remembered how they said something, not just what they said. You noticed the pause before their reply, the flicker in their expression, the text they didn't send back, the tone that shifted slightly, and you didn't just observe it, you carried it. You carried it all. Your heart took every detail and tucked it away, trying to understand what it meant, trying to make sure nothing was wrong, trying to keep things from falling apart before they even began to tremble. There's a pain in loving like that, a quiet, invisible ache, because while you're scanning the emotional sky for storms, others are walking barefoot through it without noticing the clouds. You're the one forecasting everything, feeling everything, anticipating needs no one asked you to fill. And yet, when you speak your truth, when you finally share what's been eating at you, the world looks confused, like they hadn't seen what you saw, like your care is too much, like your thoughts are too heavy for the moment. But you couldn't stop thinking, not because you liked the chaos, but because the silence after conflict terrified you, the not knowing, the in-between, the limbo of not being sure if someone was okay, if they were mad, if they misunderstood. You weren't addicted to the worry. You were addicted to clarity. You needed resolution the way others needed space. You needed reassurance the way others needed time. And you hated needing those things. You hated the way your mind would replay everything just to soothe your heart for a second. There were nights you stared at your phone, crafting messages you never sent. You rehearsed the conversations, prepared your responses, wondered if maybe, just maybe, you had said too much or not enough. You weren't just overthinking, you were translating your care into protection. You wanted to protect the relationship, protect the peace, protect the people you loved from the parts of you they might not understand. Sometimes you didn't even realize how much you were spiraling. It felt normal, natural, as if thinking deeply meant loving well, as if solving emotions like puzzles would keep you close to those who mattered. But it left you tired, tired in a way that no nap could fix, tired from caring with no place to pour that care into, tired from needing answers and rarely getting them. You forgave people before they apologized. You explained your feelings so gently, afraid your emotions might scare someone away. You softened your truth so it would land more safely, even if it hurt more to say it that way. And through it all, your mind kept running, kept spinning, not to hurt you, but because it loved too hard to let go. The hardest part is that most people never knew. They saw the calm you put forward, the smile that stayed even when your chest felt tight. They didn't know how many nights you lay awake, thinking of what you could have done differently. They didn't know how much effort it took to keep your emotions balanced, your tone even, your needs hidden behind concern for theirs. You weren't broken for thinking too much. You were loving from a place that had been wounded before, a place that learned to predict pain before it arrived, a place that craved peace so deeply it tried to make itself responsible for maintaining it. But that is too much for one mind, too much for one heart. You can love without carrying everything. You can care without losing yourself in the process. You can feel deeply without needing to explain every part of it. Tonight, if your thoughts begin to wander again, if you find yourself replaying the day or analyzing every word spoken, let yourself pause, not to suppress it, not to scold it, but to gently remind your heart that it is safe now, that you don't have to figure everything out tonight, that love does not require perfection, that your worth does not live inside the accuracy of your emotional predictions. Let your thoughts soften like waves returning to shore. Let them come and go without needing to grab them all. You have done enough. You have cared enough. You are enough. And if you still feel unsure, if a part of you worries that you'll always think this much, always feel this much, always care this much, let that part rest too. Let it know that you are not here to be a caretaker of every moment. You are here to feel, yes, but also to be held, to be at peace, to let the night carry what your mind no longer needs to. You couldn't stop thinking because you cared. But tonight, let caring look like resting. Let it look like trusting that not everything needs your attention. Let it look like quiet, and if this thought brought you even a little peace, let it stay. Let it echo through your tired heart like a reminder. You were not wrong for loving this way, but you deserve to love in a way that lets you sleep. You really do. It always started the same way. The silence would fall, the conversation would end, the door would close, and then it would arrive. That one quiet question that never left you alone. It wasn't loud or cruel. It whispered gently, like it belonged there, like it had earned a room inside your thoughts. And night after night, you asked it, over and over, what did I do wrong? Not because you wanted to blame yourself, but because you believed that if something went wrong, it must have started with you. You asked that question not only after conflict, but after silence. After someone drifted away without explanation. After someone replied more slowly. After someone laughed a little less. You felt the shift before anyone confirmed it. You noticed the quiet changes in tone, the distance in their eyes, the warmth that felt slightly dimmer. And instead of wondering what they were going through, you turned it inward. You always turned it inward. What did I do? What did I say? What could I have done differently? You weren't seeking guilt. You were seeking clarity, because uncertainty frightened you more than blame. If you were the reason, at least you could fix it. At least there was something you could hold. But when there was no clear answer, your mind filled in the blanks with its own theories. It built stories out of assumptions. It replayed old memories and inserted doubt where there was none. You weren't overreacting. You were trying to feel safe. That question became a loop, a soft echo in your mind. It followed you into showers, lingered behind your eyes while you scrolled through conversations. You would stare at your phone, reread old texts, try to decode tone and timing. You would look for the moment it all changed, for the word that tipped things too far. You would blame your timing, your honesty, your emotions, anything that could explain why something felt off. And every time the question returned, it dug a little deeper into your sense of self. You didn't always realize the damage it was doing. At first, it seemed like a way to grow, to be better. You thought self-awareness meant always checking yourself, always assuming you might have been wrong. But slowly, it became your default setting. You stopped asking what others were responsible for. You stopped questioning whether you were being treated fairly. You only questioned yourself. There were days when you felt yourself shrink in conversations. You spoke more carefully. You asked fewer questions. You tried to take up less space. All because that question lived just beneath your tongue, always ready to rise again. Did I go too far? Was that too much? Was I too emotional, too direct, too distant? You adjusted yourself in every room you entered, not because anyone asked you to, but because you were trying to prevent that question from returning. And still, it always did. The truth is, the question came from pain, from places where love was conditional, from moments when people withdrew instead of explained, from times when your vulnerability was met with silence or confusion. You learned that connection could break without warning, and so your mind decided, it must be your fault. Because if it was you, then maybe next time you could do better. Maybe next time you could keep things from falling apart. But the cost of carrying that question is heavy. It asks you to be responsible for everyone's feelings, even the ones they don't share. It tells you to monitor every word, every pause, every glance, just in case. And that's too much for one heart to hold. That's too much for someone who only ever wanted to love gently, to be understood deeply, to feel like they could exist without always being on alert. You were never the problem. You were the one trying to keep the connection alive. You were the one thinking through everything, not to manipulate, but to care more carefully. You were the one who noticed when something felt off, not because you were paranoid, but because you were intuitive. And if no one ever told you before, let it be said here, softly and clearly, you did not deserve to carry that question alone. Some people leave without explanation, because they don't know how to stay. Some people grow quiet because they're drowning in their own noise. Some people misunderstand you not because you were unclear, but because they weren't listening to begin with. And none of that makes you less worthy. None of that means you have to search for what you did wrong. Tonight, I hope that question rests. Not because everything makes sense now, but because your heart deserves peace even when the past stays unresolved. I hope you let the silence exist without inserting guilt. I hope you let your thoughts loosen their grip just for a little while. And when that question returns, because it might, I hope you respond to it, not with fear, but with compassion. Maybe the question isn't what did I do wrong? Maybe it's why do I feel like I must always be the cause of every distance? Why do I believe I must have failed when someone pulls away? Why does love feel like something I have to keep earning, moment after moment? And the answer to those questions is this. You were taught to believe your care had to come with conditions, but it doesn't. You are allowed to exist in relationships that do not make you question your every word. You are allowed to feel safe without needing to explain your softness. You are allowed to stop apologizing for being someone who feels things fully. If this helped soften even one corner of your heart tonight, let it stay. Let it echo back through all those nights when the question haunted you. Let it be your reminder that healing does not require every answer. Sometimes, it just needs someone to whisper, "It wasn't your fault. You said it more times than you can count." sometimes loud, sometimes whispered, sometimes only in your thoughts long after the moment passed. I'm sorry. 2 words that became part of your breath. You didn't always know why they came out. They just did. Sometimes before anyone blamed you. Sometimes even when no one noticed a problem. You apologized for being tired, for being quiet, for needing something. You said it when someone else was upset, even if their pain had nothing to do with you. You said it when your voice trembled, when your truth spilled out, when you simply existed in a way that felt too visible. But you weren't really saying you were sorry for doing something wrong. You were saying you were afraid. Afraid of being too much. Afraid of being misunderstood. Afraid of hurting someone without meaning to. You said it as a shield. A small attempt to protect the moment from falling apart. As if those 2 words could erase discomfort. As if they could smooth out the silence or stop someone from walking away. You said it because you learned that emotions made people uncomfortable. That when you cried, people changed the subject. That when you asked for help, some disappeared. So your apologies became your way of managing the space, of making sure no one felt burdened by your truth. You weren't seeking forgiveness. You were trying to shrink the waves before they reached the shore. There were times you said, I'm sorry, and immediately felt smaller. Not because you meant to diminish yourself, but because it felt safer than asking someone else to understand. You learned to apologize for your sensitivity, for your intuition, for your depth, as if feeling deeply was a crime, as if noticing what others missed made you responsible for how they reacted. And maybe no one told you this, but that habit came from love. A love so vast, so careful, that you tried to take responsibility for emotions that weren't even yours. You thought that by saying sorry first, you could protect the moment from becoming more painful. That if you took the blame quickly enough, you could preserve the peace. But peace built on self-blame is not real peace. It's survival. It's fear wearing the face of calm. Sometimes you said I'm sorry just for existing, for taking up space, for asking questions, for needing more than someone was willing to give. And that kind of apology carves into you slowly. It teaches you that your needs are optional, that your emotions are negotiable, that your presence is a disruption. But you are not a disruption. You never were. There is a difference between owning a mistake and owning the discomfort of being human. You weren't always wrong. You were just aware. You were tuned in to the shifts others ignored. You were trying to keep the room safe for everyone, even if it meant sacrificing your own peace. And if no one has ever said this, clearly you don't have to be sorry for being real. You don't have to apologize for feeling deeply, speaking gently, or needing clarity. You don't have to offer your guilt as a gift to those who never asked for it but were content to receive it anyway. You don't have to bow your head every time someone else frowns. You are not responsible for the weather in someone else's sky. You can care without claiming fault. You can feel without fixing. You can be honest without folding yourself in. Tonight, if you find yourself whispering, I'm sorry, into the dark again, pause. Ask yourself who you are trying to protect, whose comfort you are guarding, and what part of you still believes that love must be earned by being invisible. You are not here to manage everyone's mood. You are not a peacekeeper at the cost of your own soul. You are allowed to speak and be misunderstood. You are allowed to show up with emotion and not apologize for it. You are allowed to be seen in your full depth without shrinking into a quieter version of yourself. The world taught you to say sorry because it didn't know how to sit with emotion. But you are not here to make others comfortable at your own expense. You are here to breathe deeply, to speak truthfully, to feel freely. And if that feels like too much for someone, that is not your failure. That is their limit. Let tonight be the moment you begin rewriting what I'm sorry means to you. Let it be something you say when you truly regret, not when you feel small. Let it be reserved for real harm, not imagined disruption. Let it be honest, not habitual. If this moment offers you a small release from the weight of apology, let it stay. Let it sink into the spaces that still carry guilt you never earned. You have the right to exist without explaining yourself. You have the right to rest without justifying your silence. You were never supposed to apologize for being the way you love. You were only supposed to be loved for it. It always started so small. A single message, just a few words, a pause too long, a tone you couldn't quite read. Something ordinary that suddenly felt like a crack in the floor beneath you. And before you even realized it, your heart was racing. Your mind was calculating. Your chest was heavy with questions you didn't know how to stop. It was never just about that message. It was about everything that might come after. Everything that message could mean. Everything it didn't say. You tried to stay calm. You told yourself not to overreact. You stared at the screen, reading it again and again, trying to make sense of something that maybe wasn't even there. But your body responded before your logic could. Because somewhere in your past, a shift in tone meant a shift in safety. A delay in reply meant someone was leaving. A vague sentence meant something was wrong. Your nervous system remembered even if you tried to forget. You didn't want to spiral. You never did, but spiraling wasn't a choice. It was your mind's way of trying to keep you safe. It was your heart's way of preparing for the worst so it wouldn't hurt as much. You started thinking about everything you might have said wrong. You wondered if you were too much. If maybe they were tired of you. If maybe something was broken and you hadn't noticed. You didn't trust the moment to be just a moment. You believed it had to mean something. That it always meant something. You rewrote your replies 3 times. You hesitated before sending anything. You wondered if silence was better, if space would fix what you couldn't name. You read the message out loud to yourself, testing how it sounded, trying to imagine their face when they wrote it. But no matter how much you thought it through, you didn't find peace, because you weren't really searching for logic. You were searching for reassurance, for safety, for the certainty that you hadn't broken something again. The spiral felt like falling without moving, like drowning in still water. You weren't crying. You weren't panicking. You were just stuck in a loop, a quiet panic disguised as reflection, and it drained you. It wore you down. All because one message pulled at a wound that had never fully healed. You've been here before, too many times. A shift in rhythm, a sudden coldness, a short reply. You've trained yourself to catch emotional changes like someone trained to hear danger in footsteps. And maybe that saved you once. But now it's stealing your breath over things that don't always mean what you think. It's not your fault. Let that be said clearly. It's not your fault your heart reacts like this. You were taught that love can vanish without warning, that one wrong word can change everything, that being careful is the only way to survive closeness. So of course, a message can undo your peace. It carries the weight of everything you've ever lost without explanation. But you are not broken. You are not dramatic. You are not too sensitive. You are a human being who once had to carry fear without comfort. And now your mind tries to protect you before anything bad can happen again. Even if it means turning a single message into 1,000 thoughts. You deserve better than that fear. You deserve connection that calms, not confuses. You deserve conversations that hold you, not haunt you. You deserve people who speak with clarity because they care how your mind races in the dark. You deserve replies that feel like safety, not silence. And if you don't have that yet, you still deserve rest. Even before the reply comes, even if the meaning stays blurry. You deserve to lay your head down without needing to solve it all. You deserve to breathe without the weight of what-ifs. Maybe the message wasn't cold. Maybe the silence wasn't intentional. Maybe it was just a moment in time, not a shift in love. But even if it was more than that, you don't have to carry it alone. You don't have to spin your heart into knots, trying to decode someone who won't speak clearly. Tonight, let the message be just a message. Let it stay small. Let your mind soften its grip, even for a little while. You've already done the work. You've already felt the weight. Now let it pass. And if the reply never comes, or if it does but doesn't bring clarity, let that be their silence, not your fault. Let that be their limitation, not your failure. You are allowed to stop chasing peace in places that never give it back. You are allowed to sleep before the conversation is over. You are allowed to heal without the explanation you thought you needed. And if this moment gives you even a breath of stillness, let it stay. Let it be your reminder that you are not broken for spiraling. You are just someone who cared deeply and had to learn too early how to survive. Uncertainty, you don't need to explain your fear to anyone who never asked where it came from. You just need to let yourself rest. You didn't want to impress them. You weren't looking to prove anything. You just wanted them to understand. Not everything, not even the complicated pieces. Just enough to see where your words were coming from. Just enough to know what lived behind your quiet gestures, your long pauses, your worried texts, your overthinking. You weren't asking them to fix you. You were simply hoping they would see the heart you were offering, fully, honestly, without asking it to be easier to hold. There's a kind of vulnerability that doesn't come from saying too much. It comes from caring too sincerely in a world that often doesn't know what to do with sincerity. You didn't craft your thoughts like a speech. You didn't plan your emotions. They came out like a slow unraveling, like a soft truth that had been waiting too long to be said. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't demand. You simply tried to open yourself in a way that felt real, and even that took everything in you. You didn't need them to agree with you. You didn't need them to feel the same way. You just needed them to listen, to stay in the space with you, to not flinch when your emotions showed their full depth. But sometimes they did. Sometimes they grew quiet, or distracted, or uncomfortable. And that hurt more than if they had disagreed. Because when someone can't sit with your truth, you start to wonder if your truth is too much. You kept speaking anyway. Or maybe not always aloud, but in the ways that mattered. Through the check-ins, through the remembering of small things, through the late replies you still made sure to send, through the softness in your tone even when you were tired. Every action was a sentence your mouth didn't always know how to say, and you hoped, more than anything, that they would read it, that they would see past the surface and understand what kind of heart was trying to reach them. You didn't want to be praised for it. You didn't want your love to be admired. You just wanted it to be met, not perfectly, not with the same intensity, just with care, with acknowledgement, with presence. You didn't want to feel like you were speaking into an empty room, like your heart kept knocking and no one was home. You were never asking too much. That fear came from the spaces where your love had been misunderstood before, where people told you that your emotions were too big, or your timing was off, or your way of caring made them uncomfortable, and maybe you believed them for a while. Maybe you tried to change how you expressed love. Maybe you tried to hide the parts that spoke too loudly. But even then, all you really wanted was to be known deeply, truthfully, without shrinking. There's a loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from offering your truth and watching someone step around it, like they saw the most sacred part of you and chose not to stop. Like your heart was a letter they never opened. That's the kind of ache you carried. Not rejection, but invisibility. And it stayed with you. Long after the conversation ended. Long after they smiled and said everything was fine. You felt it, that your heart was still unseen. You tried to explain in other ways. You softened your tone. You waited for better timing. You gave space, then circled back, hoping maybe this time it would land. But love shouldn't have to beg to be recognized. You shouldn't have to translate your sincerity into a quieter language just to be heard. You shouldn't have to make your heart more digestible for people who don't know how to chew through anything real. But you did it anyway. Because that's what your heart does. It hopes. Even when it's tired, it speaks. Even when the words tremble, it reaches. Even when no hand reaches back. Tonight, if your chest still holds the ache of feeling misunderstood, let it be honored. Let it be seen here, in this moment. You don't have to change your nature to be worthy of love. You don't have to dim your care to make someone else comfortable. The way you love is not a flaw. It's a language. And if someone chooses not to learn it, that is not your failure. That is their limit. You are allowed to want to be known, to be held in your full truth. Not just when it's easy, but especially when it's messy. Especially when your voice is unsure. Especially when your feelings don't fit into a neat script. Let tonight remind you that your heart is not invisible. That even if they didn't understand you, even if they missed the depth of your words, your love still mattered. Your truth still mattered. You were brave for showing up in a world that so often asks for masks. And if this moment gives you even a little room to breathe, again, let it stay. Let it remind you that being known starts with knowing yourself. That your voice does not lose value just because someone refused to hear it. You just wanted them to know your heart. And that is a beautiful thing. The words had already been said. The screen had gone dark. The moment was over. But inside you, it stayed. The conversation replayed itself like a film on repeat, pausing at the same moments, circling back to the same phrases. You weren't trying to hold on. You were trying to understand. You were trying to make sense of what felt unfinished, or maybe just too quiet. There was something about the way it ended that didn't feel complete, and your mind, so used to holding open loops, couldn't close this one. You kept wondering if you said the wrong thing, if your tone was off, if your words landed in a way you didn't intend. You kept replaying their responses, dissecting their pauses, thinking maybe there was something more hidden between the lines. You weren't looking for drama, you were looking for reassurance, and when it didn't come, your thoughts tried to find it on their own. That's how the spiral began. Not with conflict, but with absence. Not with loud words, but with lingering. Silence. Sometimes it was just one sentence, one slightly strange reaction, one unexpected ending, and suddenly you were deep in your own mind, analyzing, comparing, revisiting every version of the exchange. You didn't do it because you liked overthinking. You did it because you cared about what they heard. You cared about what they felt. You cared so much that you couldn't just let it float away. You wanted to protect the connection, even after. The moment passed. You went about your day, but the conversation followed you. It interrupted your tasks. It echoed beneath your attempts at distraction. You thought about texting again, just to clarify something, or to make sure they weren't. Upset, you drafted a message, but never sent it. You deleted and you scrolled up through the thread, hoping it would look different with time. But it never did. It still felt heavy. Still felt like something unresolved was sitting at the edge of your chest. You blamed yourself for not letting it go. You told yourself you were being too much, that you should move on, that normal people don't obsess like this. But your heart isn't made of switches. It doesn't know how to shut off care just because the conversation ended. Your mind isn't broken. It's just trying to protect you from misunderstanding, from being misunderstood, from being the reason something falls apart again. Maybe no one ever gave you closure when you needed it. Maybe you learned to seek it in your own mind, to create answers when none were given. Maybe you taught yourself to stay with the discomfort, just in case letting go meant missing something important. That's not weakness. That's survival. That's a soft heart trying to live in a world that doesn't always finish its sentences. It's okay that you couldn't let the conversation go. It means you were present. It means you were listening. It means it mattered. You didn't overreact. You responded with the kind of care that most people never take the time to offer. And yes, that can feel like a burden. But it also means your love is precise. It means your heart does not move carelessly. It means you take words seriously. You don't need to be embarrassed by how much you replay things. It's not a flaw. It's a reflection of your sensitivity, your awareness, your desire to do right by people. That sensitivity is not the problem. The problem is that the world rarely gives you the clarity your heart longs for. And so your mind steps in to try and fill the gaps. But that's too much to ask of one person. It's too much weight to carry. Alone tonight, I hope you allow yourself to pause the replay. Not forever, just for now. Just long enough to rest your eyes and loosen your breath. Let the silence be silence. Let the moment remain unfinished without making it a reflection of your worth. You are allowed to feel uneasy and still be okay. You are allowed to want peace and still be whole even without it. Maybe they weren't upset. Maybe nothing was wrong. Maybe the conversation ended awkwardly because life is imperfect and people are tired and emotions are messy. Maybe what you felt wasn't danger, but the absence of comfort. And maybe that absence triggered old patterns that were never your fault. If this conversation still lingers in your mind, let it sit beside you instead of inside you. Let it be something you once held, not something that still holds you. You are allowed to care, but you are not required to carry it all. And if this moment of quiet gives you a little distance from the heaviness, let it stay. Let it soften the parts of you that feel tense from thinking too long. You are not too much for wanting clarity, but you are also not responsible for every misunderstanding. Sometimes peace doesn't come from solving. Sometimes it comes from releasing. You couldn't let the conversation go because your heart is still learning it's safe even when things are incomplete. You are still enough, even when closure doesn't come. It didn't leave when the lights went off. It didn't soften when the blankets wrapped around you. Even in the stillness of night, when the rest of the world seemed to exhale, that guilt stayed. It slipped beneath your breathing, sat in the curve of your chest, echoed inside your bones. You tried to sleep. You really did. But even dreams weren't free from its grip. It followed you there too, into places that should have been safe, into stories your mind created to escape. It turned those stories into reflections of everything you were trying to forget. Sometimes it showed up in symbols, a forgotten face, a place you thought you left behind, a message that never sent. Sometimes it didn't even make sense, but the feeling was always the same, heavy, shame-colored, as if even your subconscious couldn't forgive you, and you'd wake up with your stomach twisted, your chest tight, trying to piece together what you had done wrong this time, even if nothing had happened, even if the day before was quiet. The guilt didn't need a reason. It only needed a doorway. It wasn't just about something you said. It was about how deeply you worried that your very presence might have made someone uncomfortable, that maybe you shared too much, that maybe you asked for more than you should have, that maybe your need for understanding came across as pressure. You weren't carrying guilt from harm. You were carrying guilt from being visible, from being human, from showing up in ways that felt too raw, too sincere, too alive. You apologized in your dreams. You ran through the same sentences. You tried to explain yourself again, tried to fix things in imaginary spaces, and even when no one answered, you still felt like you had failed, like you should have known better, said less, felt quieter. You punished yourself for being open, for wanting connection, for feeling too much, and your sleep, instead of being a refuge, became another arena where you had to defend your softness. People don't always talk about that kind of guilt, the kind that doesn't come from actions but from emotions, the guilt of feeling like you're too complicated to love, too sensitive to stay, too intense for the spaces that prefer shallow water. You weren't trying to cause harm. You were trying to understand why your heart always feels like it's holding something wrong. And the hardest part, you never told anyone. You never said out loud how heavy it felt, how often you woke up more tired than when you went to bed, how dreams left you breathless, not because they were nightmares, but because they mirrored a version of you that still believed you were too much. And still, you smiled through the day. Still, you responded kindly. Still, you held space for others while your own needed mending. That guilt was never yours to carry. It came from voices you didn't ask for, from lessons you learned too early, from moments when love was taken away, not because you did something wrong, but because someone didn't know how to hold your truth. And so you internalized that absence, made it your responsibility, decided that if people leave, it must be because of something in you. But you were never wrong for being tender, never wrong for needing reassurance, never wrong for wanting to be understood. Your guilt is not evidence of failure. It's evidence that you have a heart that listens too much to silence, that fills in the blanks with blame, that wants so badly to never hurt anyone, it ends up hurting itself. Tonight, if you feel that heaviness again, place your hand over your heart, not to silence it, but to acknowledge it, to say, I hear you. I see the pain you've been carrying. I know it came from places where love was conditional, but you don't have to carry it into every night. You don't have to take it with you into every dream. Let this be the moment you start to trust that your intentions have always been rooted in care, that your emotions were never too big, that your desire to be close was never a flaw. And if someone misunderstood you, if someone pulled away without explanation, that is not proof of your failure. That is proof of their distance. Your dreams do not have to be haunted. They can be places of healing. But it starts with letting go of the guilt that never belonged to you. The guilt that made you question your kindness. The guilt that convinced you that love should feel like walking on glass. You are allowed to rest without apology. You are allowed to sleep without earning it through perfection. You are allowed to dream without being chased by your own shadow. And if tonight gives you even one moment of stillness, let it stay. Let it wrap around the parts of you that still flinch at your own reflection. Let it remind you that guilt is not your truth. It is a scar, and scars do not define who you are. You are not what others failed to understand. You are not the mistake your thoughts try to make you believe. You are a heart that has always tried, always cared, always meant well, and you deserve to sleep in peace. You didn't plan to say it all, it just happened. The moment opened and your heart stepped forward, maybe a little too quickly, maybe a little too unfiltered. The words spilled out, honest and trembling, like they had been waiting too long to be heard. You weren't trying to overwhelm anyone. You weren't trying to make it all about you. You were just tired of pretending you didn't care as deeply as you did. And for once, you let it show. At first it felt like relief, like air after too many minutes beneath the surface, like your chest expanding for the first time in days. But then the silence came. Maybe they didn't respond the way you expected. Maybe they went quiet. Maybe they just nodded and changed the subject, or maybe they replied gently, but it didn't feel like enough. Whatever it was, it left a space inside you where certainty should have been. And that space grew louder as the night approached. You tried to move on. You tried to distract yourself. You told yourself it was fine, that you were allowed to speak your truth, that you had every right to express how you felt. But your body didn't believe it. Your body still felt like it had crossed some invisible line, like you had broken a rule you didn't know existed, like you had opened a door that should have stayed shut. The bed felt unfamiliar that night. Too big, too quiet. Your thoughts crawled under the pillow into the space behind your eyes, into the corners of your breath. You replayed everything, not just what you said, but how you said it. Your tone, your timing, the look on their face. You wondered if you should have waited, if you should have worded it differently, if you had made it harder for them to stay. It wasn't just the content of what you said. It was the fear of being too much, too emotional, too intense. You didn't want to seem needy. You didn't want to be the one who cared more, but you couldn't keep it in anymore. The truth had become too heavy to carry alone. You needed to let it out. And even if no one told you this before, that was an act of courage. Still, your mind didn't rest. It whispered that maybe you ruined something, that maybe the connection changed forever because you let your feelings speak too clearly, that maybe if you had stayed quiet just one more day, it would have all stayed easier. But easier doesn't mean better. Easier doesn't mean honest. And love built on silence is never safe. You weren't wrong for saying too much. You were brave for saying anything at all. You were honest in a moment that asked you to stay hidden. You trusted someone with the map of your heart. And even if they folded it carelessly, that doesn't mean you were wrong to draw it. Your words didn't ruin the connection. They revealed it. They gave it a chance to breathe. And if it couldn't hold the weight of your truth, then maybe it was never the safe place you hoped it would be. That is not your fault. That is not your burden to carry. Sleep became a battlefield that night. Every time you closed your eyes, the moment came back. A different version. A new worry. A sentence you could have said better. An emotion you could have masked. But masking never made you feel loved. It only made you feel quiet, and you have been quiet long enough. You are allowed to be seen. You are allowed to speak with feeling. You are allowed to say too much, especially when too much is just the truth you've been holding back. The right people will not run from your honesty. They will sit with it. They will hold it. They will meet it with their own. Tonight, I want you to forgive yourself. Not because you did something wrong, but because you convinced yourself that you might have. I want you to rest knowing that your voice matters, that your feelings are valid, that your care does not need to be wrapped in silence to be respected. Let the night hold you now. Let the thoughts come and go without clinging to each one. Let your heart know that expression is not a crime, that vulnerability is not a weakness, that saying too much is often just another way of saying, I want to be understood. If this moment softens even one edge of the guilt you've been carrying, let it stay. Let it echo through the room like a quiet reassurance. You are not too much. You never were. You were just someone who dared to speak when it would have been easier to stay silent. And that is something to be proud of. It wasn't always something they said. Sometimes it was just a look, a pause too long, a nod that didn't reach their eyes. You noticed the change, even if they didn't. The soft shift in their energy, the sudden drop in enthusiasm, the way their smile faded a beat too soon. You noticed because you always notice, and once that feeling landed, it stayed. The thoughts settled into your chest like a quiet ache. Maybe they're disappointed in me. You didn't need them to say it out loud. Your mind filled in the blanks with precision. You remembered moments from the past that felt similar. You searched for proof. Maybe you weren't funny enough. Maybe you were too quiet. Maybe you opened up too much. Maybe you asked for something they didn't want to give. Whatever it was, your heart assumed you must have caused the shift. That their disappointment had a name, and it was yours. You weren't trying to make everything about you. You just wanted to understand. Disappointment to you wasn't just a feeling, it was a warning sign, a crack in the foundation, a signal that something was wrong, and it might be your fault. You didn't need blame to be spoken aloud. You carried it anyway, because somewhere along the way you learned that silence doesn't mean safety. It means figuring out what you did wrong before anyone else has to say it. And so you rewrote conversations, not to change the past, but to find the exact moment their gaze shifted. You asked yourself questions with no answers. Was it your timing, your vulnerability? Did you miss something? Say too much? Say too little? And even when they assured you nothing was wrong, your body still braced itself, because reassurance never quite reached the part of you that needed it most. That part of you was built in childhood, or maybe in a relationship that mirrored it. That part of you learned that people often hide their dissatisfaction, that one small mistake could change how they see you, that love could turn cold without explanation. So now, even the smallest signs feel like proof. Even neutral expressions feel like judgment. Even kindness can feel like it's running out. You don't do this because you're dramatic. You do this because you've experienced what it's like when someone quietly stops loving you, when the warmth fades and you're left wondering what changed, when the air between you feels different and no one tells you why. That kind of uncertainty stays in the body. It shapes how you see every pause, every sigh, every glance. So you prepared. You tried to be better. You adjusted yourself. You quieted the parts of you that might make someone leave. And still, that fear lingered. You kept asking yourself what went wrong, even when nothing had. You kept carrying the responsibility for every mood that wasn't yours to manage. But you are not a disappointment. Even when someone else seems distant, even when their energy shifts, even when they don't meet you where you hoped they would. That is not a reflection of your worth. That is not proof that you failed. It is a mirror of their world, not yours. You have always been too quick to believe you are the reason something changes. You have always been too ready to rewrite your actions, your intentions, your truth. But tonight, let that part of you rest. Let the over-responsibility untangle from your ribs. Let the need to explain disappear for a while. Sometimes people are distracted. Sometimes they're tired. Sometimes they're fighting something inside that has nothing to do with you. And even if their silence felt cold, even if their reply felt sharp, it doesn't mean you are to blame. You don't have to carry what isn't yours. You are allowed to feel hurt. You are allowed to wish they had spoken with more care. But you are not required to mold yourself into a version of perfection to avoid imagined disappointment. That version of you is too heavy, too lonely, too far from the truth of who you really are. You are enough as you are, even when your words come out wrong, even when you ask for reassurance, even when your heart speaks louder than expected. The people meant to love you will not be disappointed by your humanity. They will be moved by it. Tonight, if that familiar thought returns, the one that says, maybe you let someone down, meet it with tenderness. Remind it that you are doing your best, that your presence does not require apology, that your worth is not decided by someone else's reaction. And if this thought brings you peace, even for a moment, let it stay. Let it settle where the fear once lived. You are not the reason they grew quiet. You are not the cause of every emotional distance. You are simply someone who cares too deeply and needs to be reminded gently that you do not need to be perfect. To be loved, you do not need to be flawless to stay. You only need to be yourself. It lasted only a second, maybe less. A flicker in their eyes, a shift in their expression, a glance that lingered too long or not long enough, but it stayed with you long after the moment passed, long after the conversation ended. That look remained. You carried it through your day like an unfinished sentence, trying to figure out what it meant, why it felt so loud even in its silence. You weren't imagining it. You saw something, felt something, and your heart, trained to notice even the softest shifts, held onto it like it was a message only you were meant to decode. You didn't need anyone to say it. You believed the look said everything. Maybe they were disappointed. Maybe they were tired of you. Maybe they were thinking something they couldn't say aloud. And your mind took that maybe and turned it into a story. A full narrative, complete, with memories to support it, moments to confirm it, doubts to anchor it in place. You weren't being dramatic. You were trying to understand what your body already reacted to. You felt your chest tighten, your voice slowed down, a part of you retreat. Inward, unsure of how to keep speaking now that something in the room felt off. You asked yourself if you said something wrong, if you shared too much, if your presence somehow shifted the energy. That look wasn't just about their face. It was about the space it left inside you. A space filled with questions and no safe place to ask them. You didn't want to assume the worst. You told yourself it was nothing, that maybe they were distracted, that maybe they were just lost in thought. But your body didn't believe that. Your chest still held tension. Your thoughts still circled the moment. Your breath still shortened when you remembered it. Because to you, that look felt like proof, not of what happened, but of what always happens. That things change quietly. That connection fades without explanation. That someone's eyes say goodbye before their words do. And maybe that comes from the past, from moments when silence was the only closure you received, when people left without warning, when one quiet shift in energy meant everything you feared was about to happen again. Your nervous system remembers those things, even when your logic says it's fine, even when your mind wants to believe the best. Your body holds onto what it learned, and it learned to look for signs, to prepare, to protect. But not every look is a verdict. Not every glance is filled with hidden meaning. Sometimes people are just human. Sometimes their thoughts drift. Sometimes their mood dips. And it has nothing to do with you. That's the hardest part, isn't it? Untangling yourself from what someone else might be feeling. Learning that you don't have to assign meaning to every moment that makes you uncomfortable. That it's okay to not know. That uncertainty does not always equal danger. You don't need to carry that look any longer. You don't need to keep analyzing it. You don't need to let it shape the way you see yourself. Because even if they were thinking something in that moment, even if they were unsure or frustrated or distant, that is their emotion to hold, not yours. You are not responsible for reading every shift in the room. You are not required to solve a puzzle that was never yours to solve. You were present. You were kind. You were real. And that is enough. You do not need to shrink every time someone's face hardens. You do not need to hide when someone's eyes don't meet yours the way they used to. You are allowed to stay. Soft even when the world around you feels confusing. Let that look fade now. Let it be a moment in time, not a weight on your heart. You are not defined by what you saw in someone else's eyes. You are defined by your own light, your own intentions, your own steady, breathing truth. And if tonight brings you back to that memory, if that glance still echoes somewhere in your chest, take a breath, not to dismiss it, but to make space around it, to soften its edges, to remind yourself that perception is not always truth, that someone else's face is not your responsibility. You deserve to feel safe without needing constant reassurance. You deserve to rest without having to explain yourself. You deserve to live without decoding every reaction. And if this moment brings you even a thread of stillness, let it stay. Let it fill the space where overthinking once lived. You saw something. You felt something. But that doesn't mean you have to carry it. You are allowed to let it go. You really are. It arrives without warning. In the middle of something ordinary. A familiar room. A passing sound. A word that echoes too close to a past hurt. The memory doesn't ask for permission. It slips beneath your skin, pulling you out of the present. Suddenly, you're back there. Back in that version of yourself. Back in that moment where everything felt too loud, too sharp, too exposed, and your whole body reacts before your mind can catch up. A small flinch, a skipped breath, a tightening in your stomach that no one else sees. You've done your best to move forward. You've tried to understand it, talk through it, even forgive it. But some memories don't soften with time. They just hide. They settle into quiet corners of your mind, waiting for the right trigger. And when they surface, it's like the weight of it all returns at once. Not just the event, but how it made you feel. Small, ashamed, like you were somehow at fault for simply being vulnerable. You remember the exact words, or maybe just the tone, the way their face changed, the way your heart sank. You remember wanting to disappear, to erase the moment, to make it go differently. But you couldn't. You were frozen in it, stuck between understanding too much and not knowing what to do with any of it. And even now, years later, it still hurts. Not because you're holding on to it on purpose, but because it marked something in you that has never quite healed. That memory became a lesson. Not the kind you learn and move on from, but the kind that rewrites how you show up. It taught you to be careful, to hold back, to think twice before speaking, to scan people's faces for disappointment before you finish your sentence. It shaped the way you protect yourself now, the way you deflect compliments, the way you laugh off pain, the way you try to stay one step ahead of rejection. You didn't ask for that lesson. You didn't deserve it. You were simply being real. Maybe you were honest at the wrong time. Maybe you trusted someone who didn't know how to hold your truth. Maybe you were just doing your best with what you had. And yet, the memory stuck. Not because you're weak, but because you're human. Because your heart takes everything seriously. Because even when you forgive, your body still remembers. There's a quiet shame in the flinch. The way your eyes lower, the way your chest folds in, like you're trying to make yourself smaller so the memory doesn't find you again. But shrinking doesn't make it disappear. It only gives the past more power. And you are not here to live in fear of your own story. You were not wrong for what you said, for how you felt, for what you needed. That memory may echo with pain, but it also holds truth. It holds your voice. It holds the moment you stood on the edge of honesty and chose to speak, even if it didn't end the way you hoped. Tonight, if that memory surfaces again, meet it with softness. Sit with it, not to relive it, but to remind yourself that you're no longer there. That the version of you who experienced it was brave, that they made it through, that they are still here, inside you, trying every day to trust again. You do not need to keep punishing yourself for how someone else reacted. You do not need to keep proving that you are lovable despite your sensitivity. You are lovable because of it, because of your willingness to be real, because of your hope that connection could be deeper than politeness. Let the flinch soften now. Let the muscles in your chest loosen. Let your breath return to its natural rhythm. That memory cannot hurt you here. It cannot define you. It is not a reflection of your worth. It is only a shadow of something you survived. You are not the pain that was left unspoken. You were not the silence that followed your truth. You were the heart that kept beating anyway, the voice that still speaks, the spirit that still reaches for peace. And if this night brings you even a sliver of comfort, let it stay. Let it remind the wounded part of you that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without fear. It means touching the memory and no longer flinching. You can be free from it, even if it visits again. You are stronger than the moment that tried to break you. There was no argument, no clear ending, just silence. A space that opened slowly and then widened until it felt like a distance too large to reach across. You told yourself it wasn't that serious, that people get busy, that conversations fade. But deep down, something inside you stirred. It didn't feel like space. It felt like absence. And you couldn't stop wondering if it was because of you. You went back through everything, every text, every sentence. You tried to find the moment things shifted, tried to remember what you might have said that landed wrong. You looked for signs that maybe you missed. Maybe you were too much. Maybe you didn't say enough. You blamed your timing, your tone, your openness, your silence. You blamed yourself for everything the other person never said. It wasn't about needing constant attention. You weren't desperate for replies. You just needed to feel like you mattered. like the connection wasn't only real in your own heart. And when the silence came, it felt like a verdict. Not just that they were gone, but that they had quietly decided you were no longer worth showing up for. That kind of silence speaks louder than words. It echoes inside your mind in the middle of the night. It replays old laughter like a ghost. It makes you question your memory. Was it as meaningful as you thought? Did they care at all? Were you imagining the closeness? Were you just convenient for a moment and now forgotten? You carry that silence like unfinished business, like a page that was never allowed to turn. And worse than the absence is the idea that you caused it, that something in you pushed them away, that if you were a little easier to love, they would have stayed. That thought sits at the center of your chest like a stone, heavy, cold, always there. But the truth is, silence is not always your fault. Some people don't know how to continue. Some don't have the courage to tell you they're not capable of holding what you offer. Some don't know how to handle vulnerability. And some just choose to disappear because it's easier than explaining why they can't show up fully. That has nothing to do with your worth. You showed up with your heart open. You cared honestly. You gave space when it was needed. You reached out. You waited. You tried to understand. And when nothing came back, your mind did what it always does. It tried to protect you by blaming you first. Because if it's your fault, at least it makes sense. At least there's a reason. But blame is not a replacement for closure. You are not responsible for the silence they chose. You are not responsible for the things they were unwilling or unable to say. You don't need to keep rewriting the story to make yourself the cause of their distance. Sometimes people leave not because of anything you did, but because of who they are, because of what they cannot face within themselves. And if someone walks away without explanation, that's not an invitation for you to tear yourself apart looking for answers. That's a reflection of their emotional limits, their capacity, their choice. And as painful as it is, you deserve to stop carrying their silence like a punishment. You were always enough. Even when they stopped replying, even when the messages dried up, even when your words met only empty space, you were still enough, still worthy, still real. Tonight, if that silence still echoes somewhere inside you, meet it with kindness, not to fill it, not to change it, but to remind yourself that your voice still matters, that your emotions are still valid, that your presence is still valuable even when it is no longer acknowledged by the ones you hoped would stay. You are allowed to grieve a goodbye that was never spoken. You are allowed to miss someone who never gave you closure, but you are not required to carry the blame for their vanishing. That weight is not yours. And if this quiet moment brings you a breath of clarity, let it stay. Let it hold the part of you that still wonders if you were the problem. You were not. You were simply someone who loved enough to notice when someone else stopped showing up. You do not have to keep waiting for a response that may never come. You do not have to punish yourself for someone else's silence. You only have to begin letting go. You never wanted to be perfect. You just wanted to be understood, not in a way that demanded agreement, not in a way that required constant validation, but in the quiet way where someone sees your intentions before they judge your words, where someone hears the truth beneath the trembling voice. You weren't asking for someone to fix your pain. You only wanted them to know where it came from, what it meant, how hard you tried to speak from a place of care, even when the words came out messy, but too often that didn't happen. You said one thing and they heard another. You reached out and they thought you were pulling away. You were trying to express vulnerability, and they called it drama. You were searching for closeness, and they called it neediness. And every time that happened, it didn't just hurt. It made you question your voice. It made you doubt the very language you had spent so long trying to speak clearly. You started holding back. Not because you stopped feeling, but because the risk of being misunderstood felt too great. You rehearsed what you wanted to say. You watered it down. You waited for the right moment that never came. And when you finally shared something, it came out with disclaimers, with softness too carefully measured, with pauses that asked silently, "Is this okay?" That fear didn't come from nowhere. It was built from moments where your honesty was met with silence, or confusion, or frustration, where someone misread your words and walked away before you had the chance to explain, where your emotions were twisted into something they were never meant to be. You weren't trying to manipulate. You weren't trying to control. You were trying to connect. And the disconnection that followed made your chest ache in a place no one else could see. There's a loneliness that grows inside a person who feels misunderstood. A quiet kind, not loud enough to call attention, but deep. Enough to make you feel like maybe there's no language that can hold who you are. You begin to believe that being seen means being misread, that the more you open up, the more room there is for confusion. So you speak less, smile more. You try to appear simple, even when your heart is anything but. You know how to listen. You know how to hold others without twisting their words. You know how to ask gentle questions that let people feel safe. And maybe that's why it hurts so much when others don't do the same for you. You wonder why they don't ask what you meant before assuming the worst. Why they don't offer grace when your voice shakes. Why they don't wait long enough to understand what your silence is really saying. It's exhausting to carry that fear. It makes your world smaller. It makes your voice softer. It turns communication into a minefield where you're constantly stepping around what might be misinterpreted. And the truth is, even when you do everything right, even when your words are careful and your tone is kind, some people will still misunderstand. Not because you failed, but because they're not listening with the same care you offer. Tonight, I want you to release that fear. Not all at once, but gently, slowly, like loosening a fist that's been clenched too long. You are allowed to be misread without making it mean you are wrong. You are allowed to speak even if someone doesn't understand you fully. Your truth is still valid. Your care is still real. Your heart is still whole, even when someone else only sees a piece of it. Let this be your reminder that the right people will not run from your honesty. They will not twist your words into weapons. They will stay long enough to ask what you meant. They will hold your feelings with gentleness, not suspicion. They will not make you feel like you must be perfect just to be heard. You deserve to feel safe in your voice. You deserve to express without apology. You deserve conversations that bring clarity, not confusion. You deserve to live in a world where your words are not turned against you. And if this moment gives you even a small space to breathe without fear, let it stay. Let it sit beside the part of you that still flinches when you try to speak. Let it soothe the places where misunderstanding once lived. You are not too complicated to be understood. You have always been trying to tell the truth. You've been carrying everyone for longer than they know. Not in loud ways, not in grand gestures, but in the small, constant efforts no one asked for but you gave anyway. The way you read between words, the way you shifted your tone to make someone feel more comfortable, the way you avoided saying what you needed just so no one else would feel the weight of it. You weren't trying to be a savior. You were just trying to make sure the people you loved stayed okay. You did it quietly, without recognition, without being told. You picked up the emotional pieces before they hit the ground. You watched people's faces and moods like they were weather patterns you had to predict. You offered comfort before they asked. You lightened the mood when it got too heavy. You stayed calm even when your insides were screaming, and all of it came from love. A deep, instinctive kind of love that didn't know how to rest. You learned early that keeping people safe was the way to be needed. That being the one who holds it together meant you would be allowed to stay. That if you were soft enough, calm enough, helpful enough, no one would walk away. So you became that person, the one everyone trusted, the one who never took up too much space, the one who didn't make things harder. But somewhere along the way, the care you gave others turned into a weight on your own chest. You stopped checking in with yourself. You stopped asking if you were okay. You stopped speaking up when you needed something different, because it felt easier to manage the world than to let the world meet you where you actually were, and now you're tired. Not just from the doing, but from the holding, from the emotional calculations you make in every room, from the way you anticipate conflict and try to prevent it before it happens, from how your nervous system never truly relaxes because you're always monitoring how everyone else feels. You call it being considerate, but really, it's hypervigilance disguised as kindness. You weren't supposed to carry it all. It wasn't your job to be the one who catches everyone's pain. But no one ever told you that. Instead, they praised your strength. They admired how calm you were, how dependable, how steady. No one asked what it cost you to be those things. And you never told them, because that would mean someone might worry about you. And worry was what you tried to protect them from. You've become the emotional anchor in every space. But even anchors get tired. Even anchors want to float sometimes. Even the strongest need to let go, to cry, to collapse a little without fearing. They'll disappoint someone, and you deserve that too. You deserve to feel safe in someone else's arms. You deserve to speak and not scan the room for reactions. You deserve to exist without constantly protecting everyone else from your truth. Tonight, I want you to consider something. What if keeping everyone else safe has come at the cost of your own safety? What if every time you swallow your feelings, you tell yourself that your needs are less urgent, less important, less worthy of attention? And what if that isn't sustainable? You can love people without losing yourself. You can care without being the shield. You can be present without being the protector. Your value is not based on how much pain you prevent. You don't have to keep saving others just to feel like you deserve to stay. Let tonight be a soft invitation to release, to let yourself exist without monitoring every emotional shift around you, to feel your own feelings instead of absorbing everyone else's, to trust that the people who truly care about you will not crumble when you stop holding it all together. You are not here to be the emotional first responder for the world. You are allowed to be messy, to be confused, to be in need. You are allowed to exhale and not have a plan. You are allowed to sleep without scanning for danger. And if this moment offers even one breath of stillness, let it stay. Let it remind you that your softness is enough. Your care is enough. You are enough even when you're not the one holding the world together. You've been trying to keep everyone safe, but now you deserve to feel safe too. There was a lie you never knew you believed. It didn't sound like a lie when you first heard it. It felt quiet, subtle, almost reasonable. But it planted itself deep, somewhere just below your ribs, and grew roots before you had the words to name it. The lie was this: that if you felt something too deeply, you were the problem. That if your emotions spilled out, they made you weak. That your care, your tenderness, your intensity were somehow too much for the world to hold. No one sat you down and said those words. They didn't need to. It was in the looks, the pauses, the sudden change in tone when you got emotional, the discomfort that filled the room when you tried to explain your heart. You learned quickly that calm was rewarded, that silence was safer, that softness should be kept quiet. So you buried the flood. You smiled when your chest was aching. You laughed when your voice was trembling. You practiced shrinking so well that people mistook it for peace. But deep feelers don't forget. Even when they stay silent, the emotions don't vanish. They stack up quietly. They press inward. And one day, it all becomes too much. The lie begins to hurt. Not in the sharp way of a sudden wound, but in the slow exhaustion of constantly editing yourself, of questioning your own reactions, of feeling ashamed for caring too long, too loud, too fully. You started asking yourself why you couldn't let things go, why you replayed conversations hours after they ended, why you noticed the shift in someone's eyes before their words changed, why you felt heavier than others in the same room. And instead of receiving reassurance, you found more of the same message. You're too much, too sensitive, too emotional. And maybe, for a while, you believed it. That belief shaped how you loved. You held back even when you were overflowing. You chose words so carefully, it took the life out of them. You watched yourself from the outside, measuring how much was okay to say. And when you finally did open up, the fear of judgment clung to every syllable, because the lie taught you to expect rejection before anyone had the chance to truly listen. But none of that was ever your fault. The world has always struggled to hold emotion it doesn't understand, and instead of admitting its own limitations, it pointed the finger at you, told you to quiet down, to pull it together, to not feel so deeply. But the truth is, your depth was never the danger. It was always your strength. Feeling too much does not make you wrong. It means you're alive in the truest sense. It means your empathy stretches far. It means you connect dots others can't even see. It means you notice nuance. You hear unspoken words. You sense moods before they surface. That is a gift, a difficult one, but still a gift. You did not ask to be built this way. You simply are. You are the one who stays up worrying about someone who seemed a little off. You are the one who remembers the thing they said they loved 3 months ago. You are the one who cries when someone else breaks, even if their pain has nothing to do with you. You are not fragile. You are responsive. You are not dramatic. You are in tune. Tonight, I want you to unlearn that lie, even if just for a moment. Let it unravel. Let it lose its grip on your chest. You are not too much. You are exactly the size your soul was meant to be. Your emotions do not need to be filtered to be valid. Your tears are not interruptions. Your feelings are not distractions. Let yourself soften again, not into weakness, but into truth. Let your heart expand without needing to check if it's safe. Let your care spill out, not because you owe it, but because you've held it in for too long. The world might not always know how to receive it, but that doesn't mean you should stop giving it. You don't have to carry shame for being human, for being moved by things that matter, for hurting when things feel off, for wanting closeness that feels real. You are allowed to feel everything. You are allowed to be someone who cares more than they let on. And if this night brings you any peace at all, let it stay. Let it remind you of the truth you've always needed to hear. You were never too much. That was just a lie told by people too afraid to feel anything at all. You are allowed to be everything you are. All of it is welcome here. You didn't mean for it to turn into a storm. It started small, a moment, a sentence, something you said. In passing, maybe light-hearted, maybe vulnerable, maybe honest in a way that surprised even you. And then came the echo. The way the silence stretched too long. The way the conversation didn't continue the way you expected. The way their expression changed or didn't change enough. And suddenly your mind was running. You replayed it once, then again. You tried to remember the exact wording, the order of your phrases, your tone, your expression. You looked for the thing you might have said wrong. Even when nothing was confirmed, your mind filled in the gaps. You imagined how it sounded from their end. You imagined what they thought, how they judged it, how they quietly changed their opinion of you without ever saying it out loud. You weren't being irrational. You weren't overreacting. You were responding the way someone does when they've been misunderstood before, when they've seen love turn cold because of something they couldn't predict, when they've felt the pain of someone's silence after they dared to speak their truth. So now, even in the gentlest of moments, your mind remains on guard, always checking, always reviewing, always scanning for the point at which things might fall apart. You wish it didn't happen. You wish you could say something and let it go, like others do. You wish you could move through conversations with ease, without carrying them afterward like fragile glass. But you don't, because to you, every word matters. Every feeling you share is a risk. Every silence afterward feels like an unanswered question. You tried to dismiss it. You told yourself it didn't matter, but the thought returned. Did they think I was weird? Was I too honest? Did I make them uncomfortable? Should I have said less? Should I have waited? Your questions weren't about vanity. They were about connection, about wanting to be known, but not in a way that made people pull away, about wanting to be understood without regret. Sometimes you drafted follow-up messages, not because you wanted to explain more, but because you wanted to erase the weight of the last one. You thought if you just said something light-hearted next, maybe it would undo whatever tension you imagined. But that didn't ease the ache either, because the fear wasn't just about what you said. It was about how little control you had over how someone received it. You carry this habit because once, or maybe many times, you paid the price for not being careful enough. Maybe someone turned your words against you. Maybe someone left without saying why. Maybe you were told you were too much, or not enough, or simply wrong for being who you are. And now, even when the moment is harmless, your mind prepares for damage control. But you deserve peace. You deserve to speak without apology. You deserve to let a sentence be just a sentence. You deserve to say something imperfect and not spiral. For hours after, you deserve conversations that don't turn into emotional audits. You deserve to rest without carrying a transcript of every word you said. Not everyone is waiting to catch your flaws. Not everyone is measuring your worth by the precision of your language. Some people hear you with their heart. Some people understand your pauses. Some people don't need your words to be edited, filtered, softened beyond recognition. They just need them to be true. Tonight, let your mind rest. Let the sentence go. Let the moment pass. You don't need to go back and rewrite what was already spoken. You don't need to fix something that was never broken. The right people will stay, not because you always say the perfect thing, but because they love the way you mean every word. If the thought returns, meet it with kindness. Tell it gently that it's safe now, that you don't have to over-explain to deserve peace, that your presence in the conversation was enough, that you are not being judged the way you fear. Let this be the night where your voice is allowed to land and rest. You are not too much for caring about how you sound. You are simply someone who loves with their words, and that is something to be proud of. You've been carrying the weight of what you could not have known, the guilt of hindsight, the kind that whispers you should have said something else, done something differently, held back or leaned in, or been stronger or quieter or better. But you weren't working with a full map. You were doing your best with what you had at the time. The truth is, most of us are in those moments that you keep revisiting. You weren't trying to hurt anyone. You weren't careless. You weren't selfish. You were navigating complex emotions with a tired heart and a hopeful mind. You were learning while living, deciding while feeling. You made choices not because you knew they were perfect, but because they seemed right with the pieces you had in front of you. And still, you wonder if it was enough. You judge your past self with the clarity of your present self. You look back with sharper eyes and stronger tools and ask why you didn't do better. But the one who stood in those moments didn't have the same tools. They were tired in ways you've forgotten. They were overwhelmed, uncertain, trying to make sense of a situation that felt too big. You forget how brave they were. You only remember where they fell short. It's easy to look back and critique the version of you that was still building themselves, still figuring things out, still stumbling toward what healing might look like. But that version deserves more than judgment. They deserve compassion, because they kept going. They tried. They cared. They showed up even when they were scared. They reached out even when they weren't sure they'd be received. That's not weakness. That's strength, in its rawest form. You've grown since then. That's why you can look back and see things differently. That's why the choices you made no longer align with the person you are now. But growth doesn't mean you failed before. It means you moved forward. It means you're listening now, in ways you couldn't back then. That alone is proof of your effort, of your depth, of your quiet courage. There are things you wish you could say to the people in those memories. Apologies you've rehearsed in your mind. Clarifications you hope they somehow understand. But you also know that not all things get resolved in words. Some must be forgiven in silence. Some must be grieved without closure. Some must be left in the past, not because they're unimportant, but because carrying them any longer would be too much for your already tired heart. Tonight, let yourself soften toward the person you were. Let yourself breathe without bracing against the weight of old mistakes. Let yourself be seen by the one person whose forgiveness matters most. You are not your worst moment. You are not defined by how you once responded to confusion or fear or heartbreak. You are a collection of all the moments you kept trying, even when it felt like you were failing. There is no perfect response to pain, no flawless script for loss. You were doing your best to protect what you could, to feel your way through the fog, and maybe that didn't look graceful. Maybe it hurt someone, including yourself. But intention matters. Effort matters. The willingness to grow matters. You did your best with what you knew, and now you know more. You've learned how to sit with discomfort instead of running from it, how to pause before reacting, how to listen more closely, how to honor your emotions without letting them drown you. That's what healing looks like. Not perfection, but presence. Not control, but care. Tonight, if the past comes knocking, let it in only if you can meet it with gentleness. Remind it that it has been heard, that the lessons have been felt, that the wounds have started to close. And if there's a version of you still crying in those memories, wrap them in the softness you wish someone had given you. Tell them it wasn't their fault. Tell them they were doing the best they could. If this brings you even one breath of peace, let it stay. Let it replace the guilt that has overstayed its welcome. Let it remind you that being human means learning as you go, that mistakes are not character flaws, that regret does not erase effort. You did your best with what you knew, and that is enough. It didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a dramatic shift or a sudden silence. It came gently, like fog lifting from a still lake. A soft realization, quiet and kind. You had spent so many nights circling the same thoughts, chasing clarity in the dark, unraveling memories until they frayed at the edges. But that night felt different. That night, something inside you whispered a new sentence. You can rest now. You don't have to think it all through tonight. At first it felt foreign. Letting go of control, even for a few minutes, felt like a risk. Your mind had always been a guard tower, scanning for problems, solving for peace, trying to outthink pain before it arrived. Even in moments meant for rest, your thoughts kept moving, as if stillness would invite something you weren't ready to face. So you stayed busy inside your head, long after the world outside had gone quiet. But that night, something softer took hold. A different voice. Not the one that asked, what did I do wrong, or why do I always feel like this? But one that simply said, maybe you don't have to figure it all out right now. Maybe it's okay to be here without fixing anything. Maybe it's okay to close your eyes and trust that the world won't fall apart if you stop thinking for a little while. It wasn't about forgetting. You still cared. You still had things you wanted to understand, people you wished you could talk to, wounds that hadn't fully healed. But you realized that thinking harder wasn't the same as healing, that spiraling wasn't the same as caring, that staying up all night reviewing your words didn't mean you were more loving. It just meant you were tired. You looked at the ceiling that night and felt something shift in your chest. Not relief, not resolution, but the beginning of surrender. Not the kind that means giving up, but the kind that means letting go of what you were never meant to carry all on your own. The kind of surrender that says, I don't have all the answers, and that's okay. The kind that allows space for peace, even in the middle of the unknown. You placed your hand over your heart, not as a ritual, but as a response to the ache you had ignored for too long. You felt the weight of your own care, the quiet strength it took to make it through so many nights with a mind that never stopped moving. And instead of trying to silence it, you simply listened. You didn't argue with your thoughts. You didn't beg them to go away. You just said, I hear you, and I'm tired too. That was enough. That tiny sentence, that gentle pause, that was where the permission began. Not in control, not in solving, but in allowing, in saying maybe I don't have to keep reliving the same memory to prove I care. Maybe I don't have to keep explaining myself in my own head. Maybe I can sleep, even if the conversation wasn't finished, even if I don't know what they're thinking, even if my last message was left on red dot. And slowly, your breath deepened, your shoulders lowered, your hands unclenched. For the first time in a long while, you gave yourself the same compassion you so freely gave to others. You let your mind rest without demanding it be quiet first. You didn't need complete silence to feel safe. You just needed permission to stop fighting yourself. The thoughts still came, Of course they did. But they didn't hook into you the same way. They passed by like distant cars on a road you no longer needed to follow. You let them be there without inviting them in. You let your mind wander without chasing every path. You trusted that whatever was still unresolved could wait. That your healing didn't require another sleepless night. You gave yourself something rare that night. Not peace from the world, but peace from your own expectations. The permission to rest, even if your thoughts weren't perfect. The permission to be unfinished and still worthy of sleep. The permission to be soft, not just with others, but with yourself. And if tonight is another one of those nights where the thoughts return, where your mind wants to keep working long after your body asks to rest, remember that you don't have to earn quiet. You don't have to solve your way into stillness. You can simply decide, it's okay to pause now. Let this be your moment. No more fixing, no more rehearsing, no more blame. Just you, breathing gently, laying down the weight of all you tried to carry. You gave your mind permission to rest once. You can do it again. Now it didn't let go all at once. Overthinking doesn't vanish the way a storm does when the sky clears. It loosens in pieces, slowly, after years of holding you tight. It happens in the small moments, when you catch yourself halfway through another spiral and pause instead of diving deeper, when your breath interrupts the loop and says gently, not tonight. That's how it starts. Not with silence, but with space. You remember how strong the grip used to be, how one unanswered message could unravel your entire sense of peace. How a look, a pause, a sentence left hanging in the air could consume your mind for hours. You tried to think your way into safety, into understanding, into clarity. You believed that if you could just figure it all out, if you could just prepare enough, rehearse enough, predict every possibility, you could finally stop feeling anxious. But overthinking was never about finding answers. It was about control. It was your way of trying to feel less helpless in a world where people leave without explanation, where conversations don't always lead to closure, where feelings aren't always mutual. You thought if you could hold on to every detail, every possibility, maybe nothing would catch you off guard again. Maybe love would stay. Maybe your heart wouldn't break this time. And yet, despite all that effort, it still hurt. Despite the loops and the logic and the exhausting mental gymnastics, people still drifted. Emotions still changed. Life still surprised you. And slowly, a new truth began to settle in. That overthinking was not protecting you. It was stealing from you. Stealing sleep. Stealing presence. Stealing the softness that comes with simply being here. Now, instead of living in the shadows of what if, you didn't give it up out of strength. You gave it up out of exhaustion. You reached a moment where your mind was so tired from running in circles that you simply couldn't hold it anymore. And in that moment of surrender, something inside you softened. You realized you were allowed to stop. Not because everything made sense, but because you deserved rest, even without resolution. That was when it started to lose its grip. Not forever. Not perfectly, but enough to let light in. Enough to feel your breath stretch further in your chest. Enough to let a message sit unread without spiraling. Enough to let a silence remain unfilled. Not because you didn't care, but because you trusted that your worth wasn't tied to how well you predicted the emotional weather. You stopped explaining yourself so much. You stopped apologizing for your pauses. You stopped rereading your messages before sending them 3 times over. You let the conversation be what it was, imperfect and incomplete and enough. You let yourself be misunderstood sometimes, and instead of chasing down clarity, You leaned into peace. You let discomfort pass through you without turning it into a full investigation. People noticed the change, not because you became louder or colder, but because you became stiller. You were present in a way that didn't demand constant mental rehearsal. You started to trust that the people meant for you wouldn't be scared away by your silence. That you didn't have to fix everything to be worthy of love. That your emotions didn't need to be translated or disguised to be accepted. You began to reclaim your nights. The pillow stopped feeling like a battlefield. The ceiling no longer served as a screen for all the possible things that might go wrong. You let your eyes close without solving anything first, without scripting your next conversation, without asking your mind to prove its usefulness one more time before sleep. Tonight, if you feel the old grip return, if the thoughts begin circling like they used to, I want you to remember, you don't have to follow them. You can watch them pass without grabbing hold. You can let them spin while your body stays still. You don't owe every thought your full attention. Not every question is yours to answer. Not every possibility needs to be explored right now. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness underneath them, the quiet that watches, the space that holds. You are the peace that was always waiting beneath the storm. Let this night be another step. Let it be the moment your mind unclenches again. Let it be the reminder that stillness is not failure, that rest is not something to earn, that overthinking is not a sign of care. It is a habit formed in fear, and you are allowed to outgrow it. If this gave you even one breath that didn't come with a question, let it stay. Let it take root in the places where worry used to live. Let it whisper to the tired parts of you, you don't need to hold everything anymore. You can rest now. There was a version of you, quieter than the others, waiting underneath the constant movement. Not the one who always had a solution, not the one ready to apologize first, not the one scanning the room for shifts in energy or mood. A version of you that simply existed, not for others, not in response to anything, just quietly, calmly enough. And for a long time, that version felt like a stranger, too still, too unfamiliar, because the version of you the world met was the fixer. You fixed things because you thought it kept love close. You patched over silence with soft explanations. You filled in gaps in conversations so others wouldn't feel awkward. You edited yourself so carefully that people rarely had to do the work of understanding you. And when something felt off, your first thought was always, how do I fix this? Even when it wasn't your responsibility, even when it wasn't your fault. That instinct came from love, but it also came from fear. Fear of loss, fear of being the reason something breaks, fear that unless you constantly maintained the relationship, it would fall apart without warning. You became someone who stayed ahead of every crack, who spotted emotional distance before it had time to grow, who responded with overcare, overthinking, overwriting your own needs. People didn't always see it. They just thought you were strong, thought you were easy to be around, that your kindness came effortlessly. They didn't realize how often you swallowed your own confusion to keep the peace. How much effort it took to not ask the questions that lived at the tip of your tongue. How deeply you wanted to just be, without managing the emotional weight of everyone else in the room. But then came a shift. It didn't announce itself with clarity. It crept in quietly, maybe in the way you sat longer with a feeling before acting on it, maybe in the way you stopped replying instantly to every emotional nudge, maybe in the way you chose stillness instead of scrambling to fix what was never yours to hold. It didn't feel like giving up. It felt like remembering who you were before the panic told you to always be useful. The version of you that didn't need to fix was never gone, just buried. Under expectations, under past hurts, under the need to be enough. But slowly, piece by piece, you made space for them. The version that trusted others to hold themselves. The version that didn't jump to fill silences. The version that let a situation breathe before assuming it was broken. It felt strange at first, like standing in a room without cleaning it, like hearing someone sigh and not rushing to ask if they were okay, like sitting in a conversation where you didn't overexplore every word you said afterward, but it also felt right, like breathing, fully, like being held without gripping back, like existing without needing to justify your softness. You began to understand that not everything is yours to fix. That love doesn't grow stronger just because you're always holding it up. That some things fall apart no matter how carefully you handle them. And that doesn't make you a failure. It makes you human. Letting go of fixing didn't mean you stopped caring. It meant your care became wiser, softer, more rooted in trust than control. You stopped editing your truth to make others more comfortable. You stopped apologizing for your emotions. You stopped trying to read someone else's silence like it was a test. You allowed yourself the grace to let things unfold. And more importantly, you allowed others the space to show up on their own terms. Tonight, if the urge to fix rises again, if someone's tone feels off, if a message lingers without a reply, if you sense something you can't explain, pause. Not because you're wrong to notice it, but because you're allowed to not respond right away. You're allowed to wait, to rest, to let the other person hold their half. You are not responsible for healing every silence, for softening every sharp edge, for preventing every misstep. You are allowed to show up without tools in your hands. You are allowed to be loved even when you don't have an answer. And if this brings you even a sliver of stillness, let it stay. Let it settle where your urgency once lived. Let it hold the part of you that always thought being loved meant being useful. You were never meant to carry it all. You are still worthy, even when you do nothing but breathe. It wasn't about the cigarette. It wasn't about smoke or silence, or even the cold air between them. It was about presence, about two people sitting side by side without needing to explain why they were there. About the stillness that comes when words have already done their part, and what remains is something quieter, more human. That moment, brief as it was, carried a weight that had nothing to do with what was being held in their hands. It was about what was being held between them. There was a pause in the conversation that didn't feel like a failure. Just space. A shared breath. No one reached to fill it. No one shifted uncomfortably. The air moved slowly, like both of them had agreed that this was enough. Not because everything was understood, but because something had softened. The tension had loosened. Not solved, not erased, but released, if only for a little while. They passed the cigarette like it was a story they both already knew, like each inhale carried things that didn't need to be said. Regret, exhaustion, hope, maybe grief. They didn't ask each other to name it. They didn't analyze the emotion. They just sat there. And somehow, that shared silence said more than any sentence could have. You've had moments like that too, maybe not with smoke, maybe not on a porch or a curb or the back of someone's car, but in a glance, a shared look, a quiet agreement between two hearts, too tired to speak. And in those moments, there was relief, because for once, you weren't being asked to explain yourself. For once, someone else stayed in the silence with you and didn't rush to fill it. That kind of connection is rare. The kind that doesn't panic when nothing is being said. The kind that trusts the silence to speak for both of you. The kind that doesn't require performance or perfection or carefully chosen words. Just presence, just being, just allowing. We live in a world that demands noise, that equates conversation with closeness, confession with intimacy. But sometimes the most honest things we share happen in the quiet. When we stop performing our pain and simply let it sit beside us. When someone chooses to stay close even when we're not at our best. When the moment slows down and no one needs to be anything other than what they are. Maybe they didn't know exactly what you were feeling. Maybe you didn't know either. But they stayed. They didn't push. They didn't demand more from you. And somehow that allowed your heart to exhale. Because the truth is, you've spent so much of your life trying to be understood, trying to translate your feelings into language, trying to make it easier for others to love you. But what if you didn't have to try so hard? What if someone could meet you in the quiet and say without saying anything, "I'm here, and that's enough"? You don't need 1,000 conversations to be known. Sometimes one moment of stillness shared between two people who aren't afraid of silence is more healing than all the analysis in the world, because it says I don't need you to be more than what you are right now. You don't need to smile. You don't need to fix. You don't need to speak. Just be here with me. That's what that moment was. The cigarette was just a placeholder, a ritual, a slow burning symbol of time being shared rather than rushed, of pain being acknowledged without being examined, of care expressed without any need for clarity. You deserve that kind of stillness, that kind of company. You deserve someone who doesn't flinch when you go quiet, who doesn't try to fix you when your energy dims, who understands that sometimes the most important thing they can do is stay close. And let the silence be a bomb tonight. If you're replaying old conversations or worrying about what you didn't say, I want you to imagine that moment, that quiet night, that pause between two people who didn't need to prove anything. Let it be your reminder that connection doesn't always come in words. Sometimes it arrives in the spaces between them. Sometimes it lives in shared stillness, in breath, in presence. If this brings you any peace, let it stay. Let it remind the parts of you still trying to explain everything that you are allowed to rest now. That you don't have to be understood to be loved. That you don't have to speak to be seen. That you don't always have to carry the conversation just to feel close. There will be people who understand the quiet parts of you, who pass you their peace instead of their questions. And when they do, may you know what it means to truly rest. It didn't come with fanfare. There wasn't a sudden click in your chest, or a perfect sentence that wrapped it all up. The moment you finally slept wasn't cinematic. It was quiet, gentle. It arrived without needing an invitation. After everything your mind had held on to, everything it had tried to process, everything it had carried so carefully for so long, it just loosened. Not because everything was resolved, but because, for once, you allowed it not to be. You lay there, not because you'd solved the thoughts circling you, but because you chose to stop fighting them. You felt their presence, those old worries, the should-have sides, the what dash, if dash, they dash, think dash, this. The ache of misunderstanding. And you didn't argue with them this time. You didn't feed them more energy. You didn't try to untangle them in the dark. You just noticed them, nodded gently, and let them pass by like slow-moving clouds. Your breath became your guide, in and out, no questions attached, no meaning to decode, no story to relive. Just the rise and fall of something that had always been with you. Something honest. Something calming. And with each breath, your body softened. Your mind quieted. Not into silence, but into surrender. Into trust. Into a kind of peace that doesn't demand certainty to be real. You let it go. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally realized caring didn't have to look like carrying. You could still love without replaying. You could still hope without analyzing. You could still remember without drowning in it. Letting go didn't mean you forgot what mattered. It meant you stopped letting it haunt every quiet moment. It meant you forgave yourself for not knowing better. It meant you stopped reaching back for answers that never came. It meant you made space finally for the version of you who wanted to feel light again, not just at peace with others, but at peace with yourself, with all the versions of you that tried, failed, spoke too soon, stayed too long, loved too deeply, or left too quickly. You held each of them with softness, and you said, "It's okay now. You can rest too." And as you did, your heart slowed, not from defeat, but from safety, the kind of safety that doesn't require proof, the kind of safety that comes from not needing to explain anymore. Your pillow didn't feel like a place of punishment. Your thoughts didn't feel like enemies. The darkness around you wasn't heavy. It was a blanket, a breath, a doorway to calm. You didn't need a perfect ending. You didn't need them to reply. You didn't need a sign from the universe. You just needed this, a night where nothing else was required of you. No answers, no clarity, no apology, just presence, just peace, just sleep. And as your eyes finally softened shut, you let the last thoughts float up and away. You whispered to them, "You're not in charge anymore." You gave them thanks for all they tried to protect. You forgave them for all they took. And you told them what they never expected to hear. "I don't need you tonight. Not like that. Not anymore." If this story gave you even one breath of calm, let that be enough. If it helped you stop bracing for a moment, helped you hold yourself with gentleness, helped you feel less alone in your mind, then let that stay. Let it wrap around you like a hand resting gently over your heart, like a voice in the dark that says, "You don't have to try anymore." Not tonight. Sleep found you not because you chased it, but because you finally stopped running from yourself. And in that stillness, in that softness, you let go, and sleep finally came home.